At the Hollow Creek Founders Day Horse Derby, a broken-down veteran and a half-dead horse were meant to be the town's cruel entertainment. When the ranch owner tossed him the reins of a skeletal mare with a limp, the crowd burst into laughter. But what happened next silenced them all. Because some bonds aren't born of strength or beauty. They're forged in quiet pain and whispered promises no one else can hear. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The late summer sun rose bright over Hollow Creek, a tiny Wyoming town ringed by blue-green hills and dusty pasture land. Today was the Founders Day Horse Derby, an event that turned every back road into a parade route, and every heart toward old rivalries and pride. The main street was festooned with bunting, and the distant twang of country music drifted above the noise of the gathering crowd. Families flocked to the square, children trailing balloons, mothers in gingham dresses, gossiping near the bake sale tables. The scent of frying dough and grilled corn hung on the breeze. For some, the derby was just an excuse to skip chores and eat candy. For others, ranchers with reputations at stake, it was war by another name. Year after year, the Ramsey Ranch dominated the winner's circle. Their sleek, shining horses and well-paid trainers all but guaranteed the town's richest man, Clayton Ramsey, a spot on the podium. This year, banners with the Ramsey crest waved from nearly every corner. Yet as the crowd gathered in anticipation for the opening ceremony, a different kind of stir began weaving through the square. Ethan Walker lingered at the edge of the crowd, one hand resting on the small shoulder of his daughter Emma. The two of them cut a striking contrast to the bright, confident faces around them. Ethan's shirt was clean, but faded, his boots worn thin at the heel, and the battered Stetson on his head had seen better years. Emma, all of 7, wore a too-big denim jacket that had once belonged to her mother. They didn't belong, not really, but they were here. Clayton Ramsey took to the makeshift stage with all the presence of a man used to being the center of attention. He wore a spotless white hat and a smile honed sharp by decades of small-town politics. His voice boomed through the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the Founders Day Derby is a tradition older than most of us. It's about grit, about roots, about honoring the best our land has to offer. And today, I have the honor of giving a special gift to a special man, our very own hometown hero. A man who served his country and came back to us a little worse for wear, but still standing. Ethan Walker, would you step forward? A few polite claps mixed with murmurs and sidelong glances as Ethan nudged Emma ahead and walked toward the stage. His gait was steady, betraying nothing. And what better way to honor a hero, Clayton continued, than with a gift befitting a warrior. Folks, bring her out. From behind the stage, 2 stable hands led forth a horse. If the crowd had expected a thoroughbred, what they got was a spectacle. The mare was a ghost of her former self. Rib bones showed under a patchy coat. Her left hind leg dragged slightly with each step. Her eyes, large, brown, and impossibly sad, looked right through the crowd. Clayton placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, grinning. An old horse for an old soldier. Makes sense, don't you think? The crowd erupted. Someone in the back shouted, "Hey, Ethan, that bag of bones come with a return policy." Laughter echoed through the square. Even the stable boys couldn't hide their smirks. Emma squeezed her father's hand. Ethan just stood there, still as stone. He didn't answer the taunts or even look at Clayton. Instead, he walked slowly to the mare, moving with a deliberate calm. The world narrowed to the 2 of them, the battered soldier and the forgotten animal. He laid a hand gently on the horse's neck. For a moment she flinched, as if expecting pain. Then slowly she lifted her head and met his eyes. In that instant, something passed between them. It wasn't pity or fear, it was recognition, a quiet understanding born from scars that ran deeper than skin. No one else noticed the moment, but Ethan did. He leaned close, voice low enough only the mare could hear. "Thank you," he said, "for not falling down." She blinked, and for a split second her ears pricked forward. Then she lowered her head, accepting the touch. In the crowd standing just behind the cluster of Ramsey employees, Claire Ramsey watched the scene with growing unease. Tall and slender, with chestnut hair pulled back in a hurried ponytail, Claire was not one to seek the spotlight. But as she saw the horse step into the light, a chill ran through her. The mare's coat was a faded gray, nearly silver in the sunlight. Her tail, once full, had been cruelly docked. But it was the eyes, gentle, intelligent, haunted, that undid her. No, it couldn't be. But every instinct screamed otherwise. Whisper. Claire's mother, Eleanor, had loved that horse. Every Sunday, mother and daughter would ride together, Claire on a Shetland pony, Eleanor on the gray mare she called her Shadow. After Eleanor passed away, Whisper had disappeared. When Claire asked her father, he'd brushed her off, sold her. Horses come and go. Yet here, years later, was a shell of that once magnificent animal being paraded as a joke. Claire took a step back, pulse racing. She watched Ethan lead the mare from the square, questions rising in her chest. Why had her father lied? How had Whisper ended up like this? And was it too late to do anything for her? Back on the main street, the crowd began to disperse. The derby would start soon. There were bets to place rivals, to eye old feuds to revive. No one noticed Ethan and Emma slipping away, leading their unwanted gift with slow, careful steps. The horse followed, limping but proud, as if determined to keep pace no matter what. Clayton called after them, grinning wide for all to see. Good luck with that heap of bones, Ethan. Don't let her blow away before race day. A new round of laughter followed them out of the square. But Ethan didn't turn around. He kept his head high, one hand steady on the lead rope, Emma trotting close beside him. For a while, no one spoke. The road out of town was quieter than the square, the sound of celebration fading into the distance. Ethan finally broke the silence, bending close to the mare's ear. "I don't know your name," he murmured. "But there's something in your eyes that feels familiar." He stopped for a moment, studying the way the horse watched him, wary, but no longer hopeless. "Maybe we're not so different, you and I," he said. "We're both still here somehow." Up the street, Claire still stood frozen. She watched Ethan's figure growing smaller, the broken horse trailing behind. Memories tugged at her, the sound of hooves on frost, her mother's laugh, the secret joy of running full speed across open fields. "Whisper, is it really you?" She made a silent vow to herself. Whatever it took, she would find out the truth. And if there was any way left to save that horse, her mother's horse, she would not stand aside. Beneath the Wyoming sun, as Ethan led the mare past the edge of the fairground, something subtle shifted. The first seed of change had been sown not with fanfare, but with a simple, stubborn act of kindness that nobody else saw. And sometimes, that's how miracles begin. The trek home was longer than Ethan remembered, the road rutted and pocked from last spring's floods. Each step the gray mare took was slow, almost tentative, as if she expected at any moment to be told to turn back. Emma walked ahead, her small boots sinking into the dirt, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to check on the horse, or maybe on her father, who hadn't spoken since they left the square. At the far edge of Hollow Creek, beyond the white church steeple and the last gas station, sat a sagging line of trailers and battered pickups. Ethan's was at the very end, barely visible behind a tangle of weeds and a sagging wire fence. The yard, if you could call it that, was a patchwork of mud-stubborn crabgrass and broken tools rusting where they'd fallen. A few battered plastic toys lay half-buried under the porch remnants of better years. There was no barn, no stable, not even a proper paddock. Just a flat patch of ground and a shed that leaned so far to one side, Ethan always worried it would collapse with the next storm. The trailer itself bore the scars of survival-patched windows, a dented door, and a single step that wobbled when you put weight on it. Ethan stopped, let Emma drop Whisper's lead rope, and looked around. The gray mare stood perfectly still, head low, not fighting her fate. It was a posture Ethan knew well, the quiet resignation of someone who's learned to expect little and hope even less. He pressed his palm to the horse's bony shoulder. "Well, girl, not much of a palace, but it's home. For now." Whisper didn't react. She simply exhaled as if she'd already known. The afternoon sun slipped behind a bank of clouds. Ethan got to work, unsure where to start. He dragged an armful of hay from the back of the trailer, tossing it into a pile near the porch. Emma watched from a distance, her knees drawn up under her chin as she sat on a crate, arms wrapped around her legs. "Daddy? What's her name?" she asked softly, eyeing the mare with a mix of awe and worry. "I don't know yet," Ethan said, pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow. "We'll ask her when she's ready." He glanced at Emma, noticing the tiny smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. For a moment, she looked almost happy. A breeze lifted the corner of a blue scarf tied to the coat rack by the trailer door. The faded cloth fluttered like a pennant, Sarah's favorite wrap, long since frayed but never discarded. Ethan paused, staring at the fabric. A memory sharp and sudden pulled him away. Kandahar, Afghanistan. A canvas tent humming with the low buzz of a portable generator, the stink of sand and sweat clinging to every surface. Ethan sat on the edge of his cot, turning a dog-eared photo over and over in his hands himself, Sarah and a tiny, squirming Emma at the county fair years before. His eyes ached from sleeplessness. A fellow soldier, Martinez, ducked into the tent, grinning. "Hey, Walker, when this is all over, what are you going to do? Go back to the city?" Ethan shook his head. "No, man. I want land. Not much, just a little place. Enough for Emma to run wild with dogs, maybe a horse or two. Sarah, she loves horses. Grew up with one named Willow. I promised her we'd get another someday." Martinez laughed. "Horses are expensive, brother." Ethan just smiled. "Yeah, but they make Sarah smile. That's worth it." Flash forward years, then cancer, then loss. Billings, Montana. Hospital walls painted in pastels, pretending to be cheerful. Sarah lay in the hospital bed, face drawn and almost translucent. The fight was going out of her, but her grip on Ethan's hand was iron. "If you can't keep the house, it's okay," she whispered, voice ragged but fierce. "Promise me something else." He squeezed her hand, tears stinging his eyes. "Don't let Emma think we gave up. Don't let her believe losing is all there is for people like us." Ethan blinked, silent. Sarah forced a tiny smile. She needs to see her father stand, even when it hurts. A gust of wind rattled the trailer window, snapping Ethan back to the present. The blue scarf danced in the air, and for a second, it felt like Sarah was there, watching, judging, hoping. Ethan straightened, crossing to Emma and Whisper. He knelt, ran a hand gently along the mare's bony shoulder. "I don't have the land, Sarah," he murmured, "but I have her." And Emma's smiling again. He caught Emma's eye, and she grinned at him, a gap showing where her two front teeth had been. For just a second, the future felt possible again. Shelter came next. Ethan scavenged the yard for anything useful: old pallets, warped planks, a tattered canvas tarp that had survived 3 winters. With a hammer, a handful of rusty nails, and more determination than skill, He pieced together a makeshift lean-to against the trailer's side. Emma insisted on helping. She gathered stray bricks to anchor the tarp and found a moth-eaten blanket from her toy chest. "This goes under the straw, Daddy," she said, spreading it carefully, "so she can sleep soft." When they finished, the stall looked more like a fort built by desperate children than a shelter for an animal. But it stood. At dusk, Ethan filled a dented bucket with water and scattered the last of the hay in front of the mare. Whisper sniffed it, uncertain, then began to eat. "Home-cooked meal, huh?" Ethan muttered. He leaned on the makeshift fence, exhaustion creeping into his bones, watching Emma whisper stories to the mare as darkness closed in. After Emma was asleep, Ethan emptied his wallet onto the scarred kitchen table. $18 and some coins, barely enough for groceries, let alone feed for a horse. Still, he headed into town before the feed store closed. The owner, Mr. Jenkins, was sweeping out front when Ethan arrived. "Evenin', Ethan." "What brings you in?" Ethan hesitated, then asked for the cheapest compressed hay and the oldest bag of feed. Jenkins didn't say a word, just filled the order, and as Ethan counted out, Bill slipped an extra handful of mineral salt into the bag. "For your girl?" "And for the horse too," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, fighting back a surge of gratitude he wasn't sure how to express. That night, as the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, Ethan sat out by the makeshift stall, a mug of stale coffee warming his hands. Whisper lay curled in the straw eyes, half closed, as Emma recited a bedtime story from memory. Later, after Emma was tucked into bed, Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts before finding the name he needed. "Frank Delaney," he said aloud, then hit dial. Frank had lived 3 trailers down, as long as Ethan could remember, a former cowboy old army horse trainer, and the closest thing the town had to a living encyclopedia of all things equine. Frank arrived before sunrise the next morning, parking his rusted Dodge beside the fence. He wore a battered straw hat and a denim jacket stitched and restitched so many times it was more patch than fabric. "Well, hell," Frank muttered as he got a good look at Whisper. "She's seen better days." He approached the mare slowly, hands open. Whisper sniffed his fingers, then stood still as Frank ran practiced hands along her withers, down her legs, and across her back. Frank crouched at the left hind leg, frowning. "She's favoring this leg. Tendons tight, could be old injury, maybe worse. She's used up, that's for sure." Ethan crossed his arms. "But she's gentle." Frank grunted. "Gentle's a start. Let's see what else she's hiding." He ran his fingers down the mare's legs, tracing small white scars near the fetlock. "You see these?" Frank pointed. "That's from high-end race plates. Not something you slap on a plow horse. Somebody cared about her once." He lifted Whisper's neck, searching for a small circular scar below her mane. When he found it, he looked up at Ethan, eyebrows raised. "Chip scar," Frank said. "They only tag the big money runners. Ethan, you got yourself an ex-champion here, or at least you got what's left of her." Ethan didn't answer. He reached out, smoothing Whisper's forehead, feeling the heat and the beat of her pulse under his palm. "So they called you trash," he whispered. "But you were somebody once." Frank straightened, dusting off his knees. "You want my advice, son? Don't listen to the people who laugh at what's broken. Sometimes they're the ones most afraid of being broken themselves." He gave Ethan a long, steady look. "You treat her like she matters, and you might just find she still does." By the time Frank left, the sun was creeping up over Hollow Creek, turning the junkyard grass to gold. Whisper stood in the shadow of her lean-to head, low, but eyes a little brighter. Emma skipped over shyly, holding out a carrot. The mare took it gently, crunching it down, and for the first time since arriving, flicked her ears forward. Ethan watched, heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long, long time: hope. Maybe there was more to come. The town of Hollow Creek quieted early, as it always did after the Founders Day Derby. But the trailer park on the edge of town never quite slept. Moths batted at the porch light. Somewhere down the row, a television blared static. It was almost midnight when Ethan finished laying the last forkful of straw under the battered lean-to. He paused by Whisper's side, watching the mare nudge at the hay, her breath rising in small white clouds in the cool night air. Behind him, the pale glow from the trailer window washed across the dusty yard, illuminating his own shadow. Inside, Emma slept, her favorite stuffed dog pressed to her chest, lost in the deep peace that only children know. Ethan stretched his back and was about to turn in when the soft crunch of gravel made him tense. Instinct and old habit flickered, and he reached for the flashlight tucked in his belt, then relaxed when he saw the shape stepping into the weak circle of light. It was Claire Ramsey. Her hair-loose jacket zipped to her chin, arms wrapped around a large brown paper bag. She looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. The night breeze lifted a strand of hair across her cheek as she stopped at the edge of the yard. Ethan's voice was wary even before he realized it. "You come to see how the circus is shaping up?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I came. For the horse." For a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan stepped aside, letting her approach. Whisper, as if recognizing a familiar presence, stopped chewing head, swinging up to watch the newcomer. Claire set the bag carefully on the step. She opened it and began pulling out items, bottles and tubes, a small box, something that looked like a thermometer, and a wrapped syringe. Ethan glanced at the supplies. "Didn't figure you for someone who'd know horse medicine." She didn't meet his gaze. "I do. Or, I used to." She knelt by Whisper, opening a tube and squeezing a clear ointment onto her palm. Ethan crouched beside her, watching as she worked. There was a competence to her touch, the sort that comes from years, not months. He noticed the way she avoided looking directly at him, as if her attention belonged entirely to the animal between them. She spoke softly, more to herself than to him. "I spent a lot of time with her once." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You know this horse." A pause. Claire pressed her hand flat against Whisper's cheek, closing her eyes for a breath. "She was my mother's." The words hung in the air, heavy with old grief and new discovery. "My mother, Eleanor Ramsey, she loved horses. Loved them more than people sometimes." Whisper was different. She wasn't just a pet. She was a friend, a reason to get up in the morning. When my mother was dying cancer, she spent every morning with Whisper. Sometimes she rode to church. Sometimes she just sat in the stall reading out loud or humming hymns. Whisper listened. I swear she did. Claire's voice broke for a second, and Ethan looked away, embarrassed to have witnessed such rawness. She steadied herself, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist. "When my mother passed, I was 16. I remember asking Dad what happened to Whisper. He just said he sold her. I believed him. But tonight, when I saw her in the square, the scar on her shoulder, the way she stands, the look in her eye, I couldn't mistake it. I can't." Ethan reached for the vitamin bottle, rolling it between his fingers. "So you came here to see her? Or to see if it was really her?" Claire nodded, fighting to keep her voice even. "I had to know." Whisper leaned into her hand, sighing. Claire stroked the gray mane with trembling fingers. Ethan found himself searching for the right words and coming up short. He watched Whisper, her battered frame illuminated in the yellow porch light, and suddenly understood what weighed in those tired brown eyes, a grief as deep as his own. "You mad at your father?" he asked gently. Claire kept stroking Whisper's neck. "I tried not to be. I tried to forget about all of it. But seeing her again after all this time, it's like finding a part of my mother that I thought was gone forever. It hurts. But I'm glad she's alive." Ethan nodded. "My wife, Sarah, she liked horses too. We talked about getting one back before everything changed. She told me if I ever lost everything to make sure our daughter never thought it was the end of hope. That's why I brought Whisper home tonight. I figured maybe something broken still has value." Claire looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "She's not broken. She just needs someone to believe in her." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Ethan handed her the ointment. "You know her better than I do. Would you help me with her leg?" She nodded, pushing up her sleeves. Under the warm circle of the porch light, they began their work. Ethan steadied Whisper's hind leg, while Claire gently massaged the special cream into the swollen tendon. She showed Ethan where the muscle felt hottest, how to check for new swelling, and which motions brought pain. She explained the vitamin schedule and where to inject if Whisper refused to eat. Ethan listened closely, surprised by how much she knew. "You could have been a vet." Claire gave a tiny laugh. "I used to think about it. But Mom said learning to listen to a horse's body was as important as learning medicine. She taught me to feel for heat with the back of my hand, to look for fear in a horse's eye, to trust my gut." She guided Ethan's hand, showing him the delicate way to knead muscle without causing pain. "It's not about force," she said. "It's about patience." They worked in near silence. Only the occasional soft grunt from Whisper or the whisper of hay shifting beneath hooves broke the calm. Sometimes Ethan glanced at Claire, noticing the way her face softened when Whisper responded to her touch. Sometimes Claire looked at Ethan, a trace of surprise in her eyes at how gentle he could be. Their conversation drifted. Ethan spoke a little of the War of Nights, when the only comfort was the photo of his family or the thought of coming home. Claire spoke of long afternoons in the cancer ward, watching her mother fade, wishing for something to save her. Both stories trailed off unfinished, but neither pressed for more. Whisper, lulled by the familiar scent of old friends and old pain, eventually relaxed her eyes, closing her breath, slowing. When the work was done, Claire rested her forehead against Whisper's. It was a gesture so intimate, Ethan almost stepped away, but something rooted him to the spot. "You're still here, old girl," Claire whispered. "We both are." Whisper flicked her ears forward, as if she understood. Claire's eyes were red when she finally turned around. "I can't believe he gave her away like that," she said, voice trembling. "Huh? Like she was nothing but a piece of equipment." Ethan said, "Maybe. Maybe he couldn't stand the memories. Sometimes pain makes people act in ways that don't make sense." They stood together in the silence, the only sounds the gentle exhale of the mare and the night wind in the weeds. Claire drew a shaky breath. "I promised my mother I'd take care of Whisper if anything happened. I didn't keep that promise. But maybe now, it's not too late." Ethan smiled, offering her a hand up. "You want to help? I could use the company." And so could she. Before leaving, Claire laid out a care plan in quiet, precise tones. Vitamins every morning, cream on the leg at night. If you see swelling, use the ice pack in your freezer 20 minutes at a time, no longer. And if she stops eating, call me. Ethan nodded, grateful for both the guidance and the confidence she placed in him. "Thank you for trusting me." She shook her head, smiling a little. "It's not you I'm trusting. It's her." She lingered another moment, scratching Whisper's withers, and then pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and started toward the road. As she walked away, Whisper watched her go, ears pricked forward in silent longing. Ethan glanced at the mare, then leaned into Whisper. She remembers you. And I know what that feels like. For a long while after Claire had disappeared into the dark, Ethan stayed with Whisper. He brushed her coat, checked her water, and finally sat in the dirt beside her, staring at the stars. For the first time in what felt like years, he didn't feel completely alone. There were 3 of them now, man-horse and memory bound by promises, regrets, and the shared hope that just maybe it wasn't too late for healing. The Monday after Whisper's arrival dawned cold and bright, the Wyoming sky a thin, cloudless blue. Ethan rose early, his mind set on the day's errand. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake Emma, who slept curled up in the small bed beside the window, her arms wrapped around her worn stuffed dog. Whisper stood under her lean-to eyes, half shut, but she raised her head as Ethan crossed the yard. He brushed his hand over her mane. "Back soon," he murmured. The walk into town felt longer than usual, every step heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. At the end of Main Street, the town office squatted beside the old hardware store, its windows streaked from last week's rain. Ethan entered, the familiar creak of the bell above the door punctuating the quiet. Inside, a young woman looked up from behind a battered counter. She blinked in surprise as Ethan slid a battered manila envelope across to her, the race entry form, and 10 wrinkled dollar bills he'd managed to scrape together. "You're registering for the Derby?" she asked, glancing between Ethan and the paperwork. He nodded once, silent, his jaw set. She hesitated, then fumbled for a form. "Do you, need to bring the horse in for a health check, or will you do that on race day?" "On race day," Ethan said, voice flat. He filled out the form with careful block letters, horse's name Whisper. The rest, breed, age, former wins, he left blank. The receptionist skimmed the form, her lips parting in a small, uncertain smile. "All right, Mr. Walker. Good luck." As Ethan turned to go, he caught the sound of 2 office workers whispering behind him. "Is he serious?" one asked. "That horse can barely stand." He kept walking, letting their words fall away behind him. In small towns, news spreads on the wind. By midday, every corner of Hollow Creek hummed with the story the war widow's husband, living in a broken trailer, was entering the Founders Day Derby with a half-dead horse. At the blacksmith's, hammers paused mid-swing. At the gas station, someone scrawled Ethan's ghost on a chalkboard. At the bakery, 2 women hovered by the bread aisle, whispering to each other as Ethan and Emma passed. Emma, clutching a bag of oatmeal in both arms, felt the glances even if she didn't understand the words. The women turned away, muffling their laughter, but the sting lingered. Emma pressed closer to her father, not daring to look up. She didn't know exactly what was wrong, only that it was something unfair, something that made her want to hide. When they reached the counter, Mrs. Russo, the owner, offered Emma a gentle smile. "You and your daddy baking cookies?" she asked. Emma nodded, voice tiny. "For Whisper too, Mrs." Russo looked at Ethan, then at Emma, and slipped an extra apple into their bag. "Give that horse a pat for me." Outside, Ethan crouched to tie Emma's shoe. "People will talk," he said, meeting her eyes. "That's all they know how to do. Let them." Emma nodded, her small hand finding his. Across town at Ramsey Ranch, Clayton was in rare form. The owner, always eager for an audience, held court near the barn, recounting the charity case he'd foisted on Ethan. I tell you, he boomed, some men still believe in fairy tales. Ethan Walker, he's living proof. Thinks he can turn a broken-down nag into a Derby champion. Whisper, ha more, like whimper, if you ask me. His friends and hired hands laughed. Maybe he's hoping for a miracle one offered. Clayton snorted. Only miracle is if that horse doesn't collapse before the finish line. Whisper's a washout, and Ethan, well, I guess some men just can't face facts. Unnoticed by the crowd, Claire stood at the edge of the pasture brushing her mother's old filly. Her face was drawn tight, eyes dark. She listened to her father's words, the laughter, the easy dismissal, and said nothing. When someone called her name, she merely shook her head and led the young horse away, refusing to be part of the story her father was spinning. That night, as dusk pressed close around the trailer park, Frank Delaney arrived with his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. He found Ethan kneeling beside Whisper, rubbing liniment into her swollen leg. Frank watched for a long moment, then asked, "You really going through with this?" Ethan kept working eyes on the horse. "I am." Frank grunted. "Folks are saying you're out of your mind. That horse, hell, she might not even make it to the starting line." "This about pride, Ethan, about proving something to all those people." Ethan stopped. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked up at Frank, the porch light, catching in the lines around his eyes. "It's not about them," Ethan said quietly. "It's not about winning either. It's about not looking down anymore." Frank squinted. "You're talking riddles, son." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Everyone in this town knows me as the guy who lost everything. The man who came home from war, lost his wife, lost his house. They're not wrong. I did lose, but Emma didn't. And I won't teach her that being poor or sad or alone means you hide your head." He took a long, shaky breath. "If I don't try, if I just give in, then I teach her to take whatever life throws at her and say thank you. I can't do that, Frank. Not for her." Frank regarded him for a moment as the silence stretching between them. Then he nodded. "Then show them, Ethan. Show them what it means to stand up. But don't race for them. Race for your girl." Ethan managed to smile. "I will." Later that week, when Emma was asleep and the air was thick with the scent of rain, Claire appeared at the trailer, a saddle slung over one shoulder. She tapped on the door, her face half lit by the porch light. "This belonged to my mother," she said, holding it out. "Whisper always felt safe with it. Maybe she still will." Ethan took the saddle, running his hand over the worn leather. "Thank you," he said softly. Claire looked down, fingers twisting in her coat pocket. "I don't know if she can run or even walk straight. But sometimes you have to do something not because it's smart, but because it's right." Ethan met her gaze. "I promise I won't let either of you down. Not Whisper, not your mother." For the first time, Claire smiled, a small, uncertain thing, but real. "I believe you." The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Each dawn, Ethan led Whisper in slow, careful laps around the scrubby yard. The mare's steps were shaky, but each morning she seemed to walk with a little more confidence, a little less pain. Ethan mended the leaky shelter, reinforced the fences, and made sure there was always clean water and a warm bed of straw. The sun was a thin golden line on the horizon when Ethan led Whisper back from a slow walk around the yard. The mare moved with the same stubborn dignity as ever, but Ethan couldn't shake the sense that something had changed. Whisper had begun to drag her left hind leg, the effort evident in every step. By the time they reached the makeshift stall, she could hardly set her hoof down without shuddering. Ethan's heart clenched. He reached for his phone and dialed Frank Delaney. Frank arrived just as dusk bled into night, his old pickup rattling to a halt near the fence. Without a word, he strode over, rolling up his sleeves as he crouched beside Whisper. His hands tough and precise from a lifetime with horses probed the length of her leg, pausing to press gently along the tendon. He watched Whisper's reactions, the subtle twitch, the wince, the deep, resigned exhale. Ethan hovered behind him, wringing his hands. Frank finally stood sighing. Old girl's got an injury to her flexor tendon. Judging by the scarring, it's old, but it never healed right. That's why she limps. If you push her too hard, if she tries to run like a racehorse again, she could snap that tendon for good. Ethan swallowed. So, she can't race. Frank shook his head. Not exactly. It's not impossible. But if you do, you're rolling the dice with her future. You push her past what that leg can bear, she'll go lame. Maybe for life. For a moment, Ethan was silent and the wind hissing through the old wire fence. He pressed a fist to his mouth. The hope he'd been nursing, the stubborn belief that Whisper might yet surprise everyone, wavered dangerously. Frank laid a hand on his shoulder. You got a decision to make, son. For both your sakes. Ethan sat on the step for a long time after Frank left, watching the last streaks of color fade from the sky. Every bone in his body ached with exhaustion, but his mind wouldn't rest. He listened to Whisper breathe to Emma's soft laughter, drifting from inside the trailer. He looked down at his calloused hands, cracked and raw, and wondered if there was any fight left in him. But Frank returned the next afternoon with a battered satchel and a new glinting hope in his eyes. There's something I want you to try, Frank said, opening the bag. Inside was a mix of odd, earthy things, bundles of herbs, a block of greenish clay, a coil of willow bark. My old friend in Arizona was Apache. He taught me how they'd treat injuries like this out on the range before there were fancy drugs or vets. It's not magic, Ethan, but it helped more than once. He laid out the plan. You get some clay from the North Hill wild peppermint if you can find it, and willow bark good for swelling. Mix it together, let it cool, and spread it over the tendon. Keep it on a couple hours at a time. Massage gentle, every 2 hours, day or night. This isn't a quick fix, but it's a fighting chance. You up for it? Ethan didn't hesitate. If there's even a 1% chance, Frank... I can't give up on her. Frank nodded, his eyes softening. That's what I needed to hear. They set to work that evening. Ethan trekked up the ridge behind the trailer, filling a bucket with greenish clay. He picked mint from behind the shed and stripped bark from the willow tree by the creek. By lamplight, Frank showed him how to boil the herbs, crush the leaves, and stir the sticky, pungent mixture until it cooled. The makeshift stall became a battlefield. Ethan hung an extra tarp to block the wind, turning the narrow space into a field hospital of sorts. Every 2 hours, even through the dead of night, he would wake warm, the herbal clay in his palms, and kneel beside Whisper. He worked the paste into her leg with slow, steady circles, careful never to press too hard. Frank had shown him the right way massage to increase circulation, never enough to cause pain. Emma watched her father with wide eyes, her flashlight painting strange shapes on the wall. What are you doing, Daddy? Trying to help her heal, honey? Like when you scraped your knee and Mommy made a poultice. Emma nodded, then plopped down beside Whisper, chattering about her dreams. I dreamed you flew, Whisper, like a wind horse. You jumped over all the fences and landed in the clouds. Mommy was there too. She was standing by the fence, smiling at us. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat, but managed to smile. That sounds like a good dream, Em. As the nights wore on, Ethan grew more exhausted. His hands blistered, his arms ached, and his eyes burned with sleeplessness. Still, he never missed a treatment. He kept tally marks on a plank above the stall. Round 1, round 5, round 18, round 24. It became a mantra, a record of hope, stubbornness, and love. During the day, he took shifts unloading trucks at the freight depot. His co-workers shook their heads at the sight of him, pale, haunted fingers stained with greenish clay. You okay, Walker? One asked. Just tired, Ethan replied. No one knew he spent his nights fighting for a horse no one else believed in. Emma became Whisper's little nurse. Each evening, she arrived with her book and flashlight, tucking herself against Whisper's flank and reading aloud stories of magical horses and brave children. Sometimes she would hum lullabies her mother once sang. Sometimes she would recount her day at school, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. She never asked for anything in return. Instead, she would lay her small hand gently on Whisper's bandaged leg, tracing the line of the old scar with her thumb. "Get better, okay?" she whispered. "So we can all go to the parade together. I want to braid your mane with blue ribbons like Mommy wore." Whisper would turn soft muzzle, bumping Emma's cheek, a silent promise. It was in these quiet moments, lit only by a dying flashlight and the golden haze of a lantern, that Ethan realized he wasn't fighting alone. But hope was a thin, fraying rope. More than once, Ethan sat on the cold ground, his back to the wall, head in his hands, wondering if he was pushing too hard. What if he was hurting Whisper more than helping? What if he was clinging to an impossible dream, risking the only real bond left in his life for the sake of pride? Am I doing this for her or for me? The question haunted him. But every time he doubted, he looked over at Whisper, standing battered but resolute. She never shied from the next treatment. She never pulled away from his hands, even when he felt her muscles tremble with fatigue. There was something in her gaze that refused surrender. "You're not quitting, are you, girl?" he murmured. "Then neither am I." On the worst nights, when the wind howled and the pain in his back was too much to bear, Ethan would press his forehead to Whisper's neck and let himself believe just for a moment that miracles could happen. On the fifth night, a subtle change. When Ethan worked the clay into Whisper's leg, she no longer jerked away. Her breath came slower, more even. The swelling had eased, the heat gone. When Ethan led her around the yard, she limped, but it was less pronounced. Frank came by to check, watching closely as Whisper moved. "Long road ahead," Frank said, his voice softer than usual. "She's not ready to race, not by a mile. But you've turned her around, Ethan. You brought her back to herself." Ethan felt something break free in his chest, a cautious, flickering hope. Emma cheered, twirling in the grass. "She's getting better, Daddy. She's really getting better." Ethan knelt and hugged her close, looking over the little girl's shoulder at the battered gray mare, the horse everyone else had written off. It was far from over. But in that moment, Ethan allowed himself to believe. Whisper was not just surviving, she was fighting. And as long as she kept trying, so would he. In Hollow Creek, a small town never lacked for something to talk about. And this year's Founders Day Derby had become the only game in town. It seemed you couldn't buy gas, order a steak, or wait for your coffee without hearing a familiar refrain. You hear Ethan Walker's running that old ghost of a horse whisper. "She won't last the first 10 meters." At Joe's bar, the betting sheet was taped to the wall behind the register, right next to a faded signed photo of Willie Nelson. Someone had scrawled in bold black marker, "Whisper will collapse before the 10 mark, 3-1 odds." Beneath it, scribbled predictions grew by the hour, scratched at the start out cold before the church turned Walker in tears before noon. Some found it funny, some just wanted a distraction from the monotony of work and weather and bills. A handful seemed to relish the idea of Ethan's public humiliation, though most simply craved a story juicier than yesterday's gossip. At the gas station, old men passed the time by taking bets with battered dollar bills. At the meat shop, 2 young butchers laughed as they read a fresh post on the community Facebook page. Place your bets, miracle or mayhem. For Emma, the noise took a sharper edge. She was standing in line for milk one evening when she heard 2 teenage girls whisper behind her. "That's Walker's little girl, right? Wonder if she'll cry when the horse falls." Emma didn't say a word. She just clutched the carton tighter, refusing to let anyone see her face. On Friday night, Ethan stopped by Lenny's bar to pick up a takeout order. Emma's favorite chicken soup, a treat for her courage this week. Lenny, a broad-shouldered man, with thick gray hair and a look that could melt butter or start a fight, waved him over behind the counter. "Step in the back with me, Ethan." In the storeroom, surrounded by the smell of beer and onions, Lenny spoke softly. He produced a fat roll of 20s, pressing it into Ethan's palm. $500 cash. You walk away from this derby, nobody blames you? Hell, I'll make sure folks know it was your decision, not the town's. You keep your dignity, your little girl gets a hot meal every day, and you can stop worrying about next month's rent. Ethan stared at the money. The crisp paper seemed impossibly bright. It was more than he'd seen in one place since Sarah died, enough to buy real groceries, pay overdue bills, get Emma a new winter coat and medicine for Whisper if she needed it. Lenny read the battle in his eyes. "You got nothing to prove, son. People will forget. Nobody expects you to win anyway." Ethan handed the money back, careful not to let his hand tremble. "I don't need them to remember, Lenny. I just need Emma to know her dad didn't sell out for $500. I want her to see that some things, self-respect, faith, are worth more than a full fridge." Lenny let out a low whistle, then clapped him on the shoulder. "Stubborn as your old man. Good luck, Walker. Lord knows you'll need it." The next morning, Ethan was fixing the makeshift stall when a black pickup rolled up, idling just outside the broken fence. Clayton Ramsey's truck was washed, waxed, and twice as valuable as Ethan's home. The window slid down, revealing Clayton in a crisp white shirt collar, starched sunglasses glinting in the sun. He didn't bother to step out. "I hear you're staying in the race Clayton called Tone Slick as Oil. Just a reminder, your little slice of paradise here, it's still mine. The lease on this plot, temporary. Very temporary. All it takes is a signature, and you'll be sleeping in your car." Ethan stood in the dust, unflinching. He'd lived through darker threats. He met Clayton's gaze without blinking. "I know how leases work," Ethan said quietly. Clayton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd hate to see Emma out on the street. She's a good kid. But if you insist on making a spectacle of yourself and my horse, maybe you should think about where your priorities really lie." Ethan's fists tightened at his sides, knuckles white. But his voice, when it came, was steady. "If I quit now just to save my skin, I've already lost. Me and Whisper both. If you want to throw us out, do it. But don't think you can buy my silence or my pride." Clayton watched him a moment longer, then shrugged and rolled up the window. The truck spun gravel as it pulled away. Ethan let out a slow breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders finally settle. The old fear, the familiar ache of not being enough, echoed inside him. But he pushed it down. He'd been threatened before. He'd survived this too. That afternoon, Claire arrived as Ethan was repairing the stall door, replacing the frayed rope with new twine. She wore jeans and a faded blue jacket, hair pulled back, eyes sharper than usual. "Did my father come by?" she asked, wasting no time. Ethan nodded, not meeting her eyes. He tried his best. She reached into her pocket, producing a creased scrap of paper. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment before she unfolded it and began to read. "It's a letter from my mother. She wrote it before she died. If anything ever happens to me, keep Whisper safe, no matter what it takes." Claire looked up, and for a moment, Ethan saw the same steel in her eyes that he'd felt in his own bones. "I failed her once," she whispered. "I won't fail her again. I'm with you, Ethan, with you and Whisper. I don't care what anyone else says." Ethan managed a tired smile. "Thank you for not giving up on her, or me." Claire shook her head. Sometimes the whole town can be wrong. Someone has to stand up. I'd rather it be us. They finished the repairs together in silence, hands brushing as they tied the last knot. The sun dipped lower, setting the trailer and stall aglow with a soft, golden light. That night, the world felt unusually still. Ethan sat outside the lean-to with Emma nestled in his lap, wrapped in Sarah's old quilt. The fire burned low in the barrel, casting flickering shadows against the tarp. Whisper grazed quietly beside them, the gentle crunch of her teeth a steady comfort. Emma stirred, burrowing closer. "Are we going to be okay?" Daddy Ethan kissed her hair. "We're already okay. As long as we don't give up, nobody can beat us." He watched the flames, feeling the weight of all the town's mockery and threats pressing in. But inside that little circle of warmth, just him, his daughter, and a battered gray horse, he found peace. "We might not have anyone's faith," Ethan whispered, staring into the night. "But as long as we keep standing, they don't get to win." The wind carried his words away, but the resolve in his heart was solid as stone. Dawn crept softly over Hollow Creek, laying a pale silver mist over the battered blue tarp that sheltered Whisper's makeshift stall. The air was thin and cold, almost trembling. Ethan rose in the pre-dawn stillness, every movement deliberate, as if trying not to disturb the fragile hope that had taken root in his chest. He reached into the old pine box, where he kept his most precious memories, and drew out the faded blue ribbon. The silk was soft, the edges worn and frayed from years of gentle handling. Sarah's favorite robe, her laugh, her touch, the way she'd braid Emma's hair seemed to linger in the fabric. He held it for a long moment, pressing it to his lips, then walked over to Whisper. The mare stood quietly, her gray coat glistening with dew, eyes steady and deep. Ethan tied the blue ribbon just below her mane, his hands careful, almost reverent. "Today she rides with you," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Even if it's just as the wind." Emma stood close, her small hand resting on Whisper's leg. She looked up at her father, eyes wide and solemn in the pale light. "Mom will see us, right, Daddy?" she asked, voice so soft it nearly vanished into the air. Ethan knelt, pulling her into his arms. "She's right here, Em, all day. You just listen for the wind." A hush settled over them, broken only by the soft sound of Whisper's breathing. Claire appeared wrapped in her mother's old coat, a bottle of water in her hand. She offered it to Ethan, her fingers lingering on his for an instant. "No matter what happens out there," she murmured, eyes shining, "you've already gone farther than any of them could imagine." Ethan smiled, grateful, exhausted, uncertain. "Let's see how much farther we can go." The racetrack was unrecognizable. Founders Day Horse Derby was more than a race. It was the heart and lungs of Hollow Creek. Flags and bunting fluttered from every post. Children chased each other in the dust. Vendors hawked lemonade, barbecue, and sweet rolls. The stands were packed ranchers in battered hats, teenagers waving homemade banners, old-timers who'd seen every race since the first Derby in 1963. As Ethan led Whisper onto the track, a surge of whispers and laughter rose from the crowd. It rippled up and down the rails, swelling into a chorus of disbelief. God almighty, he really brought that old bag of bones. "Hey, that's Walker's horse. Does she have 3 legs? Or 4 today? A cripple going up against Mustang Lightning? You gotta be kidding." The words stung, but Ethan kept his head high, hands steady on the reins. Whisper didn't flinch. Her gaze swept over the crowd, calm, unafraid, almost regal. Some people fell silent, watching her with unexpected respect, as if recognizing something they couldn't quite name. Frank Delaney, leaning over the whitewashed fence, lifted his felt hat in salute. "It don't matter how far she runs," he muttered to his neighbor. just matters she's here. Ethan looked up into the stands, searching for Emma and Claire. He found them near the finish line, Emma clutching Sarah's old scarf, Claire standing tall and proud despite the nerves dancing in her eyes. The starter's pistol cracked a bright, sharp report that sent the horses flying from the line in a whirlwind of dust and thunder. 6 horses, sleek, muscled, gleaming with health, shot forward, hooves pounding jockeys, urging them on with shouts and flicks of the reins. Whisper, against all odds, did not stumble. She didn't lag behind as everyone expected. Instead, she moved with surprising rhythm, falling into step with the middle of the pack. Her stride was short-measured, but sure. Ethan's heart leapt. He kept his touch-light voice low and encouraging. "That's it, girl. Just like we practiced. Stay with him. You're doing fine." For the first 100 meters, then 2, then 3. Whisper held her own. The crowd's laughter faded to murmurs, then to startled applause. Someone whistled. A little boy shouted, "Look, Daddy, she's running." Ethan felt the tension drain from his shoulders. This was already more than anyone had dared dream. He didn't use the crop. He didn't shout. He simply whispered, "Good girl." Just like that. "Keep going." Whisper's ears flicked back, catching his words. For the first time in years, she ran for the joy of it, not fear or pain. The lead horses surged ahead as the pack hit the first incline, a gentle but steady hill that separated the contenders from the hopefuls. Whisper began to lose ground, her breath growing harder, flanks quivering. At the 700-meter mark, her stride faltered. The old injury left hind leg betrayed her, each step becoming more labored. She stumbled, caught herself, and pressed on. Ethan felt her pain in his own bones. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a private comfort. "Slow down if you need to, girl. We don't have to prove anything." But the field streamed past them one by one. The crowd regained its courage, and the jeers returned sharper than before. "There goes Walker's miracle, knew it wouldn't last." "Wave goodbye, Ethan." Ethan glanced over and caught Claire's eyes in the stands wide with worry. Emma's hands were pressed together in prayer. Whisper's head dropped. She gasped for air. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he should pull upend it before shame or injury forced their hand, but Whisper kept moving, stubborn as Wyoming stone. As the course curved toward the old white church, its clapboard walls glowing in the morning sun, wind chimes tinkling from the porch, a hush fell over the crowd. It was here Claire had told him that her mother Eleanor used to ride Whisper every Sunday morning. The memories clung to the ground like fog. As they drew level with the church gate, Whisper stopped. Not a stumble, not exhaustion, she simply halted. Her ears pricked, nostrils flared, neck arched. For a breathless moment, the world froze. Ethan looked around, expecting the race officials to signal them off the track, but no one moved. Even the crowd fell silent, unsure what they were witnessing. Whisper stood, muscles trembling as if listening for something invisible, a voice, a memory, a song only she could hear. Ethan reached to dismount, worried the old mare had finally found her limit. And then a sudden gust of wind set the church chimes singing a delicate, haunting melody. Whisper quivered, snorted softly, and stamped her hoof. Then she launched forward like a bowstring, released, her body suddenly flooded with life and power. She sprinted. Ethan barely had time to regain his seat. Whisper flew down the track, her head stretched forward, mane streaming behind her like a comet's tail. The blue ribbon snapped and fluttered with every stride, a flash of sky against her dappled coat. It wasn't the awkward, desperate run of an injured animal, it was a resurrection. Her stride lengthened, grew smoother, every muscle working in harmony. Her eyes burned with determination, no fear, no pain. Only the raw, wild joy of running. Ethan could barely believe what he felt beneath him, the strength, the will, the heart. He whispered, voice trembling, "That's it, girl. Show them who you are." The crowd erupted, shock, wonder, then wild applause. "Look at her go! Is that the same horse she's flying?" Emma screamed herself hoarse, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Go, Whisper, go!" Frank pounded his hat against the fence, laughing through his tears. Ethan's own heart thundered. He realized as Whisper soared past the church and into the final curve that this was more than muscle and bone. It was spirited memory love. Whisper was running for all the years she'd been forgotten, for Eleanor, for Sarah, for every heart that ever learned to hope again. Every hoofbeat sang a song of defiance. I am still here. I am still worthy. I am not finished. And in that moment, under the Wyoming sun, the impossible became real. A broken horse and a broken man. Running not for victory, but for dignity, for the right to be seen, to be remembered, to be loved. For a moment, time on the Hollow Creek racetrack bent, the noise falling away into a hushed tunnel. Whisper's hooves struck the dirt in a new cadence, swift, unbroken. A song that vibrated through the soles of Ethan's boots and up into his very chest. After the miracle at the church, with the blue ribbon trailing like a comet from her mane, Whisper accelerated. In the space of 100 meters, she closed the gap to the middle pack. The clatter of hooves grew thunderous, dust boiling up around them as riders urged their horses for the final stretch. But Ethan didn't lift his crop. He didn't need to. He simply leaned forward, voice low but clear in the chaos. "That's it, girl. She sees you now." Each time they overtook another horse, Whisper didn't veer or falter. Her stride was straight, unwavering, her spine stretched long and proud. There was something in her movement, an old glory unspoiled by time or pain. For the first time all day, the stands shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by a new sound, shouts and whistles, people rising to their feet in disbelief. "Look at her! She's catching them! Go, Whisper, go!" As she swept past the third horse, then the second, even the doubters could no longer pretend not to care. They watched transfixed as the bag of bones from the morning now soared. Every heartbeat, every stride, every memory of sorrow or humiliation was pounded into the dust behind her. With only 200 meters left, Whisper drew even with Blaze, the reigning champion stallion, golden chestnut, and powerfully built muscles rippling under his slick coat. Blaze had never lost a derby. His rider glanced sideways, surprised to see the gray mare beside them, her eyes fixed on the finished breath, strong body arched like a drawn bow. The crowd was on its feet, the roar swelling louder with each stride. Ethan reached down, fingers stroking the damp side of Whisper's neck, his voice a quiet prayer. "She's watching you, you know. Show them who you are. Show them there's nothing left to fear." For an instant, it felt like Sarah was there, her presence woven into the fabric of the moment, a warmth at Ethan's shoulder, her smile shining through the late morning sun. He remembered her words, soft and sure. "Don't let Emma think we ever gave up." Whisper snorted, her ears flattening in determination. She surged forward, every muscle in her body gathering for one last, impossible burst. Step by step, she narrowed the gap, Blaze's jockey now yelling, urging his mount not to falter. No one in the stands believed what they were seeing, not even the old-timers who'd watched 100 races. The horse, everyone pitied the man, everyone mocked. They were right there, challenging the king of the track undaunted. The last 100 meters felt like a lifetime compressed into the pounding of hooves and the wild, hopeful silence of a town holding its breath. Blaze and Whisper ran neck and neck, their manes whipping together, sweat and dust mingling on their flanks. For those few seconds, nothing existed outside the track. The past was gone, the future not yet written. Along the rails, Claire clung to the cold iron, her knuckles, white lips moving in a silent plea. "Come on, you can do it, girl. Please." Emma, standing atop an old wooden crate, barely breathed her eyes, wide fists pressed tight against her chest. She whispered, "Go, Whisper, go," again and again, as if her words alone could carry the mare forward. Ethan risked a glance at the grandstands, his vision blurred. There, between the sunbeams and the dust, he almost saw Sarah laughing, radiant, her arms open in welcome. He blinked, and she was gone, but the feeling remained a strength at his back. He bent close to Whisper's ear, his voice the last thing she'd hear before the finish. "Run. Show her you were never just someone's leftover." And Whisper ran. She drew a deep, shuddering breath and stretched forward her legs, extending her stride, lengthening by inches. Each hoofbeat was a declaration not of speed or victory, but of survival, of heart. Blaze's rider lashed at the stallion desperate, but Whisper's will was untouchable now. In those final meters, she passed Blaze just half a length, then a whole. Then she was first her shadow crossing the line before all others. The stands erupted, first an explosion of noise, then a strange collective hush, as if no one dared believe what they'd seen. Ethan sat motionless in the saddle chest, heaving. The world tilted. Sound came back all at once. The cheers washed over him, but he didn't hear them. All he saw was the Whisper nostrils, flared sides, heaving the blue ribbon whipping in the wind. He slid from the saddle, his legs, unsteady tears streaming down his cheeks. Claire was the first to reach them. She threw her arms around Whisper's neck, sobbing with relief and joy, her face pressed into the gray mane. "My mother was right. You're still a warrior, girl. You always were." Emma rushed in, clinging to Ethan's side, her small arms wrapping around his waist. "I knew Whisper would win, Daddy. I told you." Ethan laughed and wept all at once, kissing his daughter's hair. But even in that triumphant moment, Whisper stumbled, her left hind leg, trembling, nearly buckling beneath her. Ethan caught her head, panic surging. "Easy, easy," he murmured. Frank Delaney pushed through the crowd, crouching to examine the leg. He ran his hand down the tendon, his face grave but calm. "Needs a cold pack quick as you can. It's swollen, yes, but not broken." She knew her limit, and she chose it herself. Ethan nodded, pressing his forehead to Whisper's relief and pride flooding through him. "You did it, girl. You really did it." The energy of the crowd slowly softened. Cheers faded to whispers, shouts to sighs. But the silence was not empty. It was full, heavy with awe, with respect, with a new understanding. Near the track, a grizzled rancher wiped his eyes, hand pressed to his chest. I think I just saw something bigger than any race. Something I'll tell my grandkids about." The town council president mounted the stage, microphone in hand, trying to declare the winner. But most people weren't listening. Their eyes were on Whisper, the miracle mare, the survivor, the teacher. The blue ribbon still fluttered in the breeze, a banner for Sarah, for Eleanor, for every lost dream reclaimed by hope. Ethan knelt beside Whisper, taking her head in his hands, resting his forehead gently against hers. "You won, girl. Not because you finished first, but because you never quit. That's all I could ever ask." Above them, the sky was clear and blue, a Wyoming sky wide enough for every heart in Hollow Creek to learn at least for one morning what it meant to believe. The air was soft and golden, one of those Wyoming evenings, when the sky turned the color of faded denim, and everything seemed gentler for a while. Ethan knelt beside Whisper, wiping the mare's leg with a damp cloth, checking for swelling, whispering the same words of reassurance he'd been repeating every evening since the race. The barn was still unfinished, little more than a lean-to, but it felt almost like home. He heard the crunch of gravel before he saw the truck. A cloud of dust drifted over the lot as a battered old Ford rolled to a stop beside the crooked fence. For a moment, Ethan tensed, and then recognized the shape of the man who climbed out. Clayton Ramsey wasn't wearing a white suit or polished boots. There was no bluster in his step, only a fatigue that seemed to weigh down every bone in his frame. He paused, one hand on the truck door and the other gripping something folded in his fist. He looked older than ever, eyes sunken, beard more salt than pepper. The swagger replaced by something raw and hesitant. Clayton shuffled forward, stopping just outside the reach of Whisper's nose. The mare barely opened her eyes, her head resting on the rail content and at peace. For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant calls of meadowlarks and the slow rhythm of Whisper's breath. Finally, Clayton found his voice. It was scratchy, uncertain, a man unused to apology. "I used to think I was stronger than pain, you know," he said, not quite meeting Ethan's eyes. "That if I pushed hard enough, kept moving, the past would stay buried." He gestured weakly at the horse. "I threw away the one thing my wife loved most, thinking it'd help me forget. I didn't just fail her, I failed this animal too." His voice cracked and he paused, gathering himself. "I'm sorry." Ethan set aside the cloth, wiped his hands on his jeans, and nodded once. He didn't say a word, but his eyes softened, the hard edge of battle weariness, giving way to something like understanding. In that moment, neither man was a victor or a villain. They were simply two souls, battered and regretful, standing together in the fading light. Clayton lingered, shuffling his feet. Then, with a deep sigh, he settled onto the old bench beside the stall, a piece of furniture as weathered as the men themselves. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it on his knee. It was a contract official letterhead, and all but something about the way he handled it felt different, almost shy. He offered the paper to Ethan. "I know you don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "But you saved her life, Whispers. You gave her something I couldn't, and I want to do better. If you're willing, I'd like you to come work at the ranch. Not just as a trainer, but as someone who actually cares for these animals. Help me learn how to do it right. Help me take care of her and the others." Ethan took the contract, his hands rough and steady. The salary wasn't much, but it was enough. The details hardly mattered. What caught his eye were the words scribbled at the bottom in Clayton's careful hand: "Not hiring a horseman, but someone who can love them like family." Claire stood in the shadows just outside the stall, her arms folded, watching her father. For the first time, hope flickered in her expression, cautious but real. Ethan looked up, meeting Clayton's gaze fully. "This isn't about money for me," he said, voice steady. "I don't train horses for a paycheck. I help them heal, just like they helped me." He hesitated, then laid down his own terms. "If I do this, you have to learn too. Not just how to handle a whip or keep records. You have to use your hands, your eyes. You have to care about what they feel. And don't count the number of horses you sell. Count the number of kids who find a friend in them." Clayton was silent for a moment, working through the words. Finally, he nodded slowly, then, with growing conviction. "I've been counting wrong my whole life, Walker. Maybe it's time to start again, and this time I'll do it with my heart." In the days that followed, the rhythms of the ranch began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Clayton returned to the house each evening with dirt on his jeans, sweat on his brow, and once or twice a quiet laugh as Whisper nudged his shoulder for a treat. The fence posts were mended, the paddocks raked, and for the first time in years, a feeling of possibility hung over the property. Claire visited often, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just a smile and a few kind words for Emma. They would sit together in the golden hour, watching the horses graze the mountain light, softening everything it touched. One afternoon, as Ethan spread hay in the new paddock, Claire approached with a mug of ginger tea. She offered it wordlessly, her fingers lingering a little longer against his as he took the cup. The shadows grew longer as they worked side by side, and the silence between them felt easy comfortable. "You know," Claire said quietly, "you didn't just save Whisper. You saved my father too." "I didn't think he'd ever come back to himself, not really." Ethan smiled, just a hint of his old sadness still there. "What about you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, her eyes shining in the dimming light, and reached out to rest her hand gently on his. "I think you saved me a little too." Emma was always nearby, skipping through the grass, carrying pails of water, and inventing elaborate stories for the foals. She adored Claire, calling her the new horse teacher for the kids. Her laughter echoed across the yard, proof enough for Ethan that sometimes miracles came in quiet, everyday ways. The new barn began to take shape, built with more care than money, each plank a promise, each nail a vow. Whisper was there for every step, grazing peacefully, occasionally lifting her head to watch Ethan and Claire with a wise, steady gaze of one who knew just how far hope could carry the brokenhearted. In the warmth of the late summer evenings, as the sun melted behind the hills and the world slowed to a hush, Ethan realized something unexpected: forgiveness of others, of himself, was possible after all. Not easy, never simple, but real. And in that perhaps lay the greatest gift Whisper had given them all. 3 months after the thunderous race that turned Hollow Creek upside down, a small crowd gathered at the edge of Ramsey Ranch, now about to become something else. The old wooden sign, its letters faded and splintered, lay propped against the fence. Above the gate, a new board waited in Claire's hands, the words carved slowly and carefully by Frank and Emma herself: Whisper Hills Equine Center, where broken spirits learn to run again. There were no speeches, no band or champagne. Instead, Ethan, his hands still rough and stained, knotted the last piece of rope to hold the sign in place. Claire, standing at his side, spoke quietly to the gathering townsfolk, her voice steady but full of conviction. "We're not just reopening a ranch," she said. "We're building a place for healing for horses, and for people too." Clayton Ramsey stood apart from the crowd, his boots dusty, his posture no longer that of the man who once ruled this land with an iron fist. He didn't step forward to claim the moment. He simply bowed his head as the sign swayed in the wind, a small act of humility, a silent promise to do better. The days that followed were marked by the whinny of horses, the laughter of children, and the scrape of shovels against earth. Whisper Hills blossomed into a living classroom. Claire, now the program's heart and soul, designed something no one in Hollow Creek had ever seen: a community course open to all. They welcomed children who had so little, kids from battered homes, foster care, the children of wounded veterans. Some came shy and silent eyes, darting hands clenched. Others arrived with bravado, hiding old wounds behind jokes or bravado. All found themselves drawn to the gentle rhythm of the barn. Claire's curriculum wasn't about ribbons or blue medals. Instead, she taught the basics: how to curry a mane, clean a stall, carry a pail of feed with both hands steady. She explained that listening to a horse required more than words. It meant patience, attention, and respect. On Saturdays, she led silent mornings where the children sat quietly with Whisper or one of the other horses, simply watching, breathing, learning to sense rather than speak. Emma, now almost 7, and growing braver by the day, became everyone's favorite helper. She would guide newcomers, introducing them to Whisper with a wide-eyed reverence usually reserved for fairy tales. She told the story of the miracle horse who had come from nowhere to show the world what second chances could look like. Her own laughter, a sound Ethan had thought he'd never hear again, rang through the yard and gave courage to children even more fragile than she had once been. For Ethan, teaching was not about following a manual. Every lesson was shaped by the students and the horses themselves, each pair, each day, a new story waiting to be lived. Some kids, like the tiny red-haired boy from the shelter, cried the first time a horse sniffed their palm. Others, like a tough, quiet teenager who wore a Marine Corps ball cap, would only stand at the gate, arms folded, watching from a distance. But Whisper had a way of pulling them in her stillness, more persuasive than any words. The great mare herself had changed too. Whisper would never run another race. The tendon injury had left its mark. She moved with a stately patience, now stepping carefully, favoring her left leg, but never complaining. Whisper's days as a champion were over, but something more profound had taken their place. Whisper became the gentle lead horse for the most anxious students, especially those who flinched at loud noises or trembled near the barn doors. It was always Whisper, lying on her side in the soft sand, who would draw the shyest children near. Many would creep up in awe at first, just watching her breathe, then daring to lay a hand on her flank, and in time to trust that no sudden movement would ever come. One afternoon, as the golden light slanted across the paddocks, a boy whose family had come from a refugee camp, mute since seeing violence, Ethan could barely imagine, approached Whisper. He reached out, pressed his hand to her forehead, and began to sob, not in fear, but in pure, unfiltered relief. Ethan knelt beside him, whispering, "She's already told you you don't need words to be heard." The year rolled forward, and healing like the Wyoming grass, took root in unexpected places. Clayton, his hair nearly silver, now made a habit of rising before dawn to feed the horses himself. The townsfolk noticed the change, how he sat quietly by Whisper in the evenings, his hand resting on her mane. The stern lines of his face softened by something like gratitude. And then, one bright May morning, Whisper Hills gathered for another celebration, one as simple and sincere as the land itself. In the little wooden chapel beside the lake, where Claire's mother had once prayed, Ethan and Claire were married. It was a ceremony of humility. No choir, no banquet, just family children from the program. Frank and the horses lined up along the rail as silent witnesses. Whisper wore a pouch of sky blue silk, Sarah's old ribbon tied around her neck, carrying the wedding rings in a velvet bag. At the right moment, the mare walked slow and steady up the chapel aisle to deliver them. Claire's tears caught the sunlight as she knelt beside the mare, stroking her muzzle, overwhelmed by gratitude and the memory of all they had lost and found again. Ethan slipped the ring on Claire's finger, his voice breaking. "I lost everything once," he whispered. "But that horse, she brought you back to me." Instead of standing, Ethan and Claire both knelt beside Whisper as the pastor spoke. "Three souls, man, woman, horse, have found each other again." Word of Whisper Hills spread beyond the boundaries of Hollow Creek. Local schools sent field trips, veterans groups, and even a nearby rehabilitation hospital arranged tours. Children who had once flinched at every glance now rode with straight backs and easy laughter, discovering joy in simple connection. Even doctors marveled at the change in their patients, the way horses like Whisper taught them to trust again. Clayton stooped, but content could be found each dusk, leaning on the fence, dropping handfuls of oats into buckets, or just sitting quietly beside Whisper as she grazed in the fading light. In her diary, Emma wrote, "I don't have a mom here, but I have Whisper and Daddy and Miss Claire. That's all I need to grow up strong." In the gentle dusk, as the shadows lengthened over the hills, Ethan would sometimes pause at the gate, watching his daughter and the children she'd befriended. Whisper would be in the field, surrounded by laughter and gentle hands, her own journey from cast-off to champion to healer complete. Somewhere in the warm Wyoming wind, Hope ran on, quiet, patient, and tireless as a horse, who, given another chance, learned not just to run again, but to lead others home. Spring had come again to Whisper Hills, bringing with it the softest wind and the promise of renewal. It was the 10th spring since that unlikely old mare had thundered down the track and changed the fate of a town. Under the wide Wyoming sky, the old oak by the lake was just beginning to leaf out its new green, shimmering in the morning light. The bird's song was gentle, and the barn seemed to breathe in time with the breeze. Whisper was not as she had been in her racing days, or even as she'd been a few years before. Her back had rounded with age, her muzzle had grown silver, and she moved more slowly with the steady dignity of one who'd seen much and survived more. But her eyes, those deep, thoughtful eyes, still shone bright and calm, holding the promise of peace. That morning, as he had so many times before, Ethan rose before the sun. He moved quietly through the trailer, careful not to wake Claire or Emma, and pulled on his boots. The familiar crunch of gravel and the scent of spring grass filled his senses as he crossed the yard toward the barn. Usually, Whisper would greet him with a low, rumbling nicker ears, flicking forward, ready for a scratch or a treat. But today, she lay in the far corner of her stall, her legs tucked beneath her and her head resting on the straw. For a long moment, Ethan just watched her breathe. Then quietly, he entered the stall and knelt down beside her. Whisper's ears twitched at the sound, and her eyes fluttered open. She didn't try to rise. She didn't need to. Ethan slipped his arm beneath her neck, gently cradling her head in his lap. He stroked her muzzle, smoothing the soft hair between her eyes, and bent his forehead to hers. The world outside faded away, leaving only this, a man, a horse, and all the years between them. Whisper's breath came slower, each inhale a little shallower than the last. But there was no fear in her gaze, no pain, only a profound stillness, as if she knew her work here was done. He whispered, "Thank you for not giving up, for not leaving us, for never leaving yourself behind." The old mare's chest rose and fell one final time, and then she was gone. Her last breath dissolving into the golden light pouring through the open stall door. They buried Whisper beneath the great oak by the lake, the place where Emma had once ridden her bareback through the dew, shrieking with laughter. The ground was soft and green, the air humming with the promise of rain. The whole family was there. Claire, Emma, Frank Clayton, and every student who'd ever brushed a mane or filled a water bucket at Whisper Hills. Nobody spoke at first. There was no need. Tears slid quietly down cheeks, but there was no wailing, no heartbreak that felt like a wound, only the gentle ache of gratitude. Ethan himself carved the wooden headstone, shaping each letter with slow, careful strokes. Whisper the horse, who taught a town the meaning of trust, honor, and love. After the last shovelful of earth was patted down, one of the youngest students, a girl who'd found her voice here, placed a faded blue ribbon on the grave. It was the same ribbon Whisper had worn the day Ethan and Claire were married, the day everything seemed to start again. The breeze stirred, rustling the leaves above. Somewhere in that shifting light, the echo of hooves could be heard, soft and distant, a memory made real by those who loved her. Life at Whisper Hills didn't stop. It shifted, rippled, found new meaning. In the weeks after, people began to call the oak grove by the lake Whisper Grove. Children who came to the ranch, many of whom knew all about loss, would sit on the grass near the grave reading or just listening for a sound only they could hear. Ethan hung a small framed photograph of Whisper in the old barn beneath it, a simple inscription for anyone who ever thought they weren't strong enough. There was a new girl that spring, small, thin, wary, her history written in bruises and silence. She was paired with a newly rescued Mustang, wild-eyed and jumpy. The first time she entered the paddock, she froze, hands trembling. But later, standing in the barn, she touched the photo of Whisper and whispered almost to herself, "If she could do it, maybe I can try too." Claire poured her own memories into words, penning an essay for a national equine magazine. She titled it, "The Loser Everyone Laughed At, and What She Left Behind." The article traveled far, sparking letters from strangers who had their own whispers to mourn and celebrate. Emma, now 18, chose not to leave for college that autumn. She'd graduated high school near the top of her class, but the pull of Whisper Hills was too strong. She took over as assistant instructor, launching a new course called Trust on Four Hooves for kids who had seen too much pain in their short lives. One weekend during a group session under the oaks, a boy from the city knees, bouncing nervously, asked, "Why do you call this place Whisper Hills?" Emma smiled, the sun shining in her hair, her eyes alight with a wisdom far beyond her years. "Because here, every wound is heard, even the ones that don't make a sound." Ethan and Claire watched her from a distance, standing side by side in the golden afternoon. They said nothing, their fingers twined together, hearts full with pride and a quiet sorrow that was more beautiful than sad. On the first anniversary of Whisper's passing, and everyone gathered at the Grove. There was no program, no ceremony, just a circle of people holding handwritten promises on slips of paper. One by one, they read their notes silently, then folded the paper and floated it out onto the surface of the lake. Some were prayers, some were apologies, some were dreams. The wind carried them gently, as if the old mare herself was guiding their wishes across the water. When the last paper had been sent, Ethan remained behind his palm, pressed to the rough bark of the oak. He spoke so softly that only the wind could carry it away. "You were never just a horse, Whisper. You're a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance." A gust of wind set the branches dancing, and a single glossy black horsehair tumbled through a shaft of sunlight, swirling down until it vanished into the grass. And then, only silence. But in that silence on the hill, by the lake, in the hearts of all who came after the spirit of Whisper, lived on, patient as dawn, strong as forgiveness, forever listening.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.